boys and girls. I know normally I read a book, but today I'm going to read you a story that I wrote, and you're going to make a picture in your mind of the story that I wrote. The story is called Lonely Girl. Once there was a girl who lived in a lonely world. She lived in a rundown shack in the woods with her mother and grandmother. The girl was well loved by her small family, yet she still felt alone in the world. One day, the little girl set out to pick mushrooms from the forest for her mother to prepare for dinner that night. As she was wading through the forest floor in search of that night's dinner, she came upon a small shed that she had never seen before. The shed was crooked and looked as if the owner had hurriedly put it together without much thought. As she stood there puzzled as to where the shed came from, a small man with a long white beard appeared in the door. He caught her gaze and motioned for her to come to him. She stood there a bit longer, not sure if she should go to him or run away back to her shack. The girl, being very alone, decided to go to the little man and see what he wanted. The girl, who was about 9 years old, walked to the man and stood in front of him. He was even smaller when she got closer. His little old head only came to her chin, and his long white beard almost dragged to the forest floor. He stood there looking at her for a moment, sizing her up as well. He looked at her and said, "My name is Alfred, and I am a dwarf. Who might you be, young lady?" The girl straightened up to be even taller than the dwarf and said, "My name is Emily. I'm a lonely girl living in the woods with my mother and grandmother." "Lonely?" The old man chuckled. "How can you be lonely when you live in this magical place?" Emily looked around to see this so-called magic the dwarf spoke of, but all she saw was dirt and trees. Where was this magic that she wondered? Alfred saw the quizzical expression on the girl's face and held out his hand. "Come, my child, let me show you the enchantment the forest holds for you." Emily paused for a moment, then allowed the little man to take her by her young hand. As the pair walked, Alfred went on and on about the fascination that the woods held. Again, Emily only saw forest and ground, nothing else. Then Alfred stopped them in a small clearing where the sunshine was able to get in light to the forest. There, standing tall and proud, was a great fir tree. Alfred paused and said, "Look at that tree, my child. Do you not see the wonder and enchantment of it?" Emily stared at the tree for a long time, but saw nothing but bark and needles. Alfred pointed to the tree and said, "Look at that face the bark makes in the tree. Do you see it?" he shouted excitedly. As Emily stared, she began to see it. The trunk of the great tree looked like it had two small eyes and a very large opening that could act as a mouth. Alfred's eyes twinkled at the delight he could see spreading on the girl's face. Just then, a small red fox walked into the clearing. It stopped to take in the sight of the pair standing there. Slowly, the fox walked over to the dwarf and the girl and sat still with them. Alfred grinned. "See, my child, there's no way to be lonely here in these woods. Look closer at the ground around the tree. What do you see, young lady?" The girl, who was unable to take her eyes off the fox, adjusted her gaze and saw the bottom of the tree trunk. There were little yellow specks. Alfred encouraged Emily to walk over to the specks and see what they were. As the girl walked over, her eyes were able to adjust and see they were tiny little yellow flowers. Alfred called to Emily, "Those are buttercups, a beautiful yet underappreciated flower. They make the forest less dark and more alive. Don't you agree?" Emily picked up a flower and brought it to her nose. She smelled the sweetness of the flower, and it made her feel less alone. Alfred and Emily spent the rest of the day walking amongst the tall trees, finding the splendor in the woodland. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, the pair went back to Alfred's shed. Alfred looked at Emily and said, "You see, child, magic is everywhere, and it is what you make it. You are not alone as long as you have the enchantment of the forest inside you." With that, the dwarf went back to his shed and shut the door. Emily grabbed her basket of mushrooms and walked back to her home. However, this time she didn't feel lonely. For the first time in her life, she felt whole.